Hello, welcome back to another video. Today I am doing a long overdue video. I think I've done this in the past, but I certainly haven't done it for a long time, so this list definitely needs a refresh. This is my best books that I have ever read, ever. So this is a list of 8 books that I have read that I think are the best books that I personally have ever read. Obviously this is completely opinion based. These are just my top 8. I was going to try and do top 10, but I felt like I was picking off books that weren't quite hitting like the best I've ever read. So I have 8, and then I have an honorary list of 4 mentions. So those will be at the end of the video. Over my lifetime I have read a lot of books. I wish there was a log of every book I'd ever read. I have been reading since I could read, and I would love to know how many books that would equate to. A lot of the books on this list are from more recent years, and I think that's because they've had a really fresh, big impact on me when I was reading them and have clearly made this list based on that. Also, I think that because I've been really honing in my reading taste and sharpening what it is that I like reading and discovering that more in the last few years, I think that has led me to discover more favourite books. This is in no particular order other than the order I literally stacked them in, so there is no ranking system here. I did think about doing that, but honestly I don't know if I could. They're all so different from each other and they're on here for various different reasons, so I don't know if I could give a ranking system. So this is literally no order. I'm just going to dive in with book number 1. The first book is The Bridges of Madison County by Robert James Waller. I actually reread this book this month and it's definitely still up there in the favourites list. This may be a short novel, but it packs a punch. Following a romance between a National Geographic photographer and a woman who is in an unhappy marriage. This is a very short, fleeting affair, and it's beautiful and it lasts a lifetime. This will make you cry. It will make you want to go out and take photographs. It will make you want to read the National Geographic, which is exactly what I did after I finished it. I went out and bought an edition of the National Geographic. It is utterly beautiful. The first time I read this in one sitting. I had to stay up late for some particular reason when I was at uni, and I needed to make sure that I was awake and alert because I had to drive at like 1 or 2 a.m. or something. So I decided I would read a book in that time, and this is the book that I picked. This is one that my mum gave to me after she really loved it and also cried at it, and I thought I would give it a go, and it ruined me. And then I thought I would give it a go again a couple of weeks ago, and it ruined me once more. So if you want a book that is going to break your heart but also be beautiful and also teach you things and make you feel passions and other people's passions, then this is definitely one for you. I will also add about this book, this actually contains a storyline that I now really actively avoid and don't like, and that is a cheating or glamorized cheating storyline. So for me to have this on here is interesting because that is a storyline now. If a book has it as a main premise, I don't really want to touch it, because I don't like the way that cheating is glamorized in literature sometimes, or in film. But this book does deal with that, and it deals with it in a very different way, and I definitely thought it was a good approach. So as far as you can have a good approach to that kind of thing, but it's a great book. It's such a good book. Of course, The Unlikely Escape of Pariah Heap by H.T. Parry is in here. I absolutely love this. This is a book about books. It follows 2 brothers, one of which has the ability to be able to pull characters out of the pages of books and into the real world. This is a very unusual ability. This isn't something that is general knowledge to the public, and they find out that there's someone else in the world that can do this and is not doing good things with it. So the plot of this book is the journey to try and stop what this other person is doing, whilst also meeting the fictional characters that the character's brother has brought out of their books, and seeing how they are living in the real world and experiencing the real world. This features books that are actual books, they're not fictional books, like they're books that we would have read. For example, The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, David Copperfield, which is great. It's a great added layer because you as the reader can meet your favourite characters from maybe books that you read as a kid or classics, and you can see them come to life on the pages of this book, which is just such a highly creative concept and something any reader would surely want to experience, and it's done in such a fun way. This is also set in New Zealand, and I don't really feel like I've read any or many books set in New Zealand, so that's a plus as well. Just generally, the pages of this book come to life in the way that the characters come to life out of their books, and I just adored it. It was a great journey and a great adventure story at the same time as just being a nostalgic throwback to some of the books that I read when I was a child, and seeing those characters come to life and just how they all interact with each other, how fictional characters from different books meet each other and interact. And I just think that is absolutely brilliant and very clever to take the work of one author and bring it to life in a whole new book. It's great. It's fantastic, and yeah, it had to be on this list. This is always one that I default back to if someone asks me what my favourite books are. I know this book is everywhere at the moment, but it is one of my favourite books. It has to be on this list. The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I listened to this as an audiobook back in 2018. I think I'm probably due a re-listen because honestly the audiobook was probably one of the best I've ever listened to. It worked so well as an audiobook with that narration style. Oh my gosh, this book is brilliant. It really, really is. I know it's everywhere at the moment. I know that so many people know of this story, but this follows Evelyn Hugo. She's a rising starlet, and we follow her throughout that rise and that career to fame and everything she experiences along the way. And it's certainly not an easy life that she has, and it's not an easy path that she takes. It's an incredibly beautiful and harrowing story of that journey, and it's not, as I said, it's not an easy journey, so it's definitely not a light read. But oh my gosh, it's fantastic. You know that Evelyn Hugo isn't real, but you still Google her. I know that there's certain aspects of actors that were real that are reflected in her character, but my gosh, she's just fantastic. And I think that is something that Taylor Jenkins Reid has such a brilliant ability to do, is to create characters that even though you know they're not real, you still end up Googling if they are real. This was great, and this will always deserve a spot on my favourite books of all time. This book, If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio, might be the top spot. I know I said there was no order to this, but I think if someone pressed me and said, what is your one favourite book? This is the one that I keep coming back to. This is glorious. This is a dark academia. The atmosphere is just stunning. The visual imagery in the pages of this book is so clear and so gothically moody that it was just such a brilliant reading experience. At the start of this book, we meet a character who is in prison for 10 years for a murder of his friend that he may or may not have committed. We see him released from prison at the start of the book and meet with a detective who asked him what really happened. So we go back 10 years to meet him and his group of friends who are all studying Shakespeare at university, and the journey of their group of friends and the demise of that group, and what really happened to the person that was killed. I just think this is such a fantastic story. It's such a great dark academia. I love the way that the narrative was broken down into acts and scenes. I thought that was a really clever way of moving the plot along. Everything about this sucked me in. I think it's interesting when you see the start of a book looking back retrospectively and telling you that story, because you know that you are getting one angle of the story and one narrator's perspective, and that is always going to be unreliable, and I always find an unreliable narrator really interesting to read from. So many reasons, this is fantastic. I think above all, just the writing style in general stood out to me, and I desperately need more from M.L. Rio. So yeah, this one potentially sits as my favourite book of all time, but I can never fully commit to that. It depends what mood I'm in. It's brilliant. It's obviously on this list. If you haven't read it yet, go check it out. The Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafón is a book that I have always said is my favourite book of all time, until I read If We Were Villains, which I think knocked this one off. A reread of this one actually also potentially knocked it off for me, because whilst it is still one of my favourite books of all time, I don't think it is the favourite book of all time, but it did sit there for a while. This follows a young boy who, when he is a child, his dad takes him to the Cemetery of Forgotten Books, which is this hidden library where he can go and pick one book. This is not something that many people know about. It's quite an honour to be picked, and his dad obviously brings him along because he is somebody that has also been able to pick this one book. So this boy picks a book, and as he grows older we see his kind of obsession with the author of this book and trying to discover more about this author, who is quite elusive. He hasn't really got much of a history behind him, and the main character cannot really find out much information, so he goes on a search to try and discover more. This is a beautiful mystery. It weaves so many different lines of plot coming together. It's so clever and so intricate. It's set in Barcelona, so the setting is absolutely beautiful. The characters are definitely flawed, but also in different places very lovable with how they interact with each other and the kind of warmth that they offer to each other, which is very nice and wholesome and cozy to read about as well, whilst also there are shit things happening too, so like it's not all sunshine and roses for these characters, but I loved it. I loved it so much. I have read this twice now, so yeah, upon reread, I didn't love it as much as when I read it the first time, but I think it's the kind of book that once the different parts of the plot start unfolding before you, that unique feeling of, oh my gosh, what is happening, was the thing that really pushed it up to a 5-star favourite read for me. And obviously once I knew that, I didn't get that same reveal moment the next time I read it, but it's beautiful. This is part of a 4-book series that is all featured around the Cemetery of Forgotten Books. I actually have the final book in that series left to read, and I would love to get to that this year. It's a chonker. Unfortunately, Carlos Ruiz Zafón has now passed away, so we won't be getting any more writing from him, but oh my gosh, his other writing as well is glorious. There's so many different books that he's written that are just absolutely beautiful to dive into, so yeah. The Shadow of the Wind. The Book of the Most Precious Substance by Sarah Gran is next up, and this is like a sexy version of The Shadow of the Wind. This follows a rare books dealer, and she is tasked with finding this particularly rare and possibly quite dangerous book. It's a book of occult magic, specifically sex magic. So she goes on the path to find this book and meets quite a few people along the way and gets into quite a few different situations, and yeah, it's quite a dangerous book that she is after, and a lot of people are after it for different reasons. So this follows her journey across the world essentially to try and track down this book. This is filled with passion, with sex, with angst. It's just a great book. It is a sexy Shadow of the Wind, kind of Taylor Jenkins Reid in kind of style of like looking back at people's life and that kind of autobiographical element to it as well. We see kind of flashbacks from our main character of the life that she has left behind because of different circumstances and how she has come to be where she is now, and that element of it I really enjoyed as well. It just feels very gritty and raw at the same time as having a real beauty woven through it as well, and I love this book so much. This is one that I read really recently, like in the last couple of months, and this is up there in the top. Again, not a ranked list, but this would be pushing like the top of the pile if I did have to rank it. Another one I read recently is Ghost by Dolly Alderton. This was so damn relatable. We follow our main character who is living in London. She's in her early 30s. She's single. She's experiencing her dad getting dementia and what that's like. She's experiencing her friends all in different stages of their lives, getting married, having kids, and she is in a very different position. This follows a year in her life as she goes through these various different experiences. So much of this was so relatable. If you are a young single woman, you will find lines in this and be like, yes, I feel seen. So many of the conversations she had with her friends are conversations that I have had with people, and I felt seen. And I love it when a book can do that to you, because it makes you feel like there are more people experiencing what you're experiencing, and that feeling of togetherness and not being alone with it is a great thing that a book can offer you. This was also incredibly sad at places. Seeing what she was going through with her dad and his dementia developing was really, really difficult to read about. So it was a real mix of different things happening to this character, and also at the same time as dealing with like the situation of being ghosted and what that is. Like on top of all of it, like dating in London and that experience as well. So a lot of this was really hitting home, and a lot of it was stuff that I haven't necessarily experienced myself, but reading about it was so heartbreaking. It made me feel a lot of different feelings, and I just think it's brilliant. And I think if you are anyone that has experienced any of those things that I've just listed, I think you will find certain aspects of this relatable, and I think that's a great thing that a book can offer. The last book on the top 8 list before we go on to the honorary mentions is The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. This is such an epic fantasy. I love the way that this paces itself and moves through the story. This is book 1 of a trilogy. This is my favourite book in the trilogy. This is a political fantasy following Rin, who has started training at this military academy where people from all over the country come to train, and it's very intensive, it's very hard, and she's managed to get in through passing this very, very difficult test. Once she is there, she discovers that she has some shamanic abilities, and these start to develop. So this is about that side of things, but also about what is happening in the background and what is developing to build towards the climactic plot of the next 2 books as well. So I don't want to go into too much of that because I don't want to spoil those other books, but we have the fantasy element, we have the political epic big moments, we have a lot of battle moments, and just this is so good. This moves through Rin's progression at this academy throughout this book, which I really enjoyed because we see time passing quite quickly and we see the development going through there and how she grows as a character and how her abilities and her power develops as well. And I really like that element of it because it felt like the pacing was very fast, yet at the same time you get enough information about these characters to really feel for them and really know who they are as characters. And I think that is something that Arthur Klang does so brilliantly, is write characters that just come right off the page and feel incredibly real and really fleshed out, and they're not all perfect by any means, they're all definitely flawed in some way or another, and that is just a brilliant aspect of this book. Okay, that was my top 8 books of all time, ever. So let's go on to the 4 honourable mentions. So these are my 4 honourable mentions. I did want to put Babel on this list by Arthur Klang, but I thought I've already got obviously the Poppy War from Arthur Klang, and I wanted to be able to try and include as many authors as possible, so we'll put like a 5th extra honourable mention in there to Babel because that book is obviously absolutely brilliant. So we have Cloud Cuckoo Land by Anthony Doerr, which is an epic journey that spans across time and across multiple different narratives that are going on at the same time. They're all people that are trying to find out more about this specific book and how their stories all knit together. I love it when you get these kind of completely contrasting stories of each other and how they all do weave together, and this did that absolutely brilliantly. Fishes by V.E. Schwab is just excellent. It's so much fun. It questions good and evil and morality and what is right and what is wrong, and we follow people who have extraordinary abilities, which is kind of like X-Men style abilities, and what they choose to do with these abilities and how they gain these abilities, and it's great. Kindred by Octavia E. Butler is absolutely fantastic and completely stayed with me after I read it. It follows a woman living in the 70s who is sent back in time, like against her will, she doesn't know why it's happening, to the early 1800s, where she is mistaken as a slave and she has to live as a slave during this time until she then goes back to the 1970s. So it's about her experience as a black woman in the early 1800s and why this is happening to her and what, like, how she can stop it happening, and about that kind of journey of finding things out and the people she meets along the way. And then we've got The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman, which is a brilliantly bizarre read that again really stuck with me. I read this in a couple of sittings, if I remember rightly. It's been a while, but it follows a young boy who discovers this very strange fantasy element to the world and doesn't really know what to do with it, and suddenly everything is kind of different and weird for him, and for the reader too. It's definitely a very strange reading experience. So these 4 get an honorary mention for me as little side additions to the favourites pile. I've actually just thought of one other book that could potentially sit on this list. Okay, I'm just going to throw this one in at the end here, because I think this one probably should make the list as well. I haven't reread this one, and I do remember absolutely adoring it at the time, and it's really stayed with me for the end part of it, but the start of it was so slow, and I think if I read it now I would consider DNFing at the start, but it's the kind of book that once you keep going with it, you're then like, what? So this is The Family Tree by Sherry S. Tepper. I have not seen this book talked about anywhere else. This follows 2 different stories. One is kind of the main one, the one that the blurb talks about, is set in a world, well, it's our world, and basically all these trees have suddenly started popping up, and just more keep popping up, and no one can get rid of them, and no one understands what's happening. So it's kind of a conversation about climate change in that aspect. And then the other storyline that's happening is following a group who are on their way somewhere, and you don't really know too much information about them, but it's following those 2 different things that are happening. That is a really shit summary. I don't want to spoil the reason this book is fantastic. How has the blurb worded it? Okay, the blurb is more focusing on the tree storyline, and the other storyline it describes as being set in the far future when technology has all but vanished. 2 princes and their followers find themselves on similar quests that will take them back in time. By similar quests, it is referring to the tree storyline, in which people are trying to work out like what is happening to the planet, basically. I'm probably doing a really bad job of describing this, but it's really hard to describe it. If you've read it, you will know why it's hard to describe it. I just don't want to accidentally say something that will ruin this, because it's got a great element to it that comes in. So yeah, this gets an addition too. You're probably no closer to knowing what the hell this is about, but it's great. So there's the 8/9 and then 4/5 books on my favourites list and honorary mentions. I am just so thankful to be able to read all of these fantastic books. Being part of this community just opens up so many doors to be able to discover new books as well, and I love that. So it's been a great lifetime so far of reading, and I cannot wait to see what I continue to read and how much this changes, because yeah, sometimes you just have that moment where you read a book and you're like, that is a favourite book, and I love that feeling. I often have to sit on it for a little bit to just check that it's definitely up there and it's not just an amazing 5-star read, but I'm so excited for all the new favourites that I'm going to discover in the future, so I really hope you have enjoyed this video. If you have, please do give it a thumbs up. Comment down below what your favourite book of all time is, or favourite books, if you can. I know it's such a difficult question to ask to a bookworm. It's the immediate panic of like, oh my god, which books did I like best, and you have to remember everything ever, which is why, for example, this one, I was suddenly like, I haven't included this one, because if I can't immediately see them on my shelves, then they're not there in the front and centre of my brain, even though I absolutely love them, and this one was covered by a plant. So this one is an example of where my brain panics and I can't remember every book I've loved ever. So you can also subscribe to more of my face on your feed, and link down below you can find my Patreon, where I do lots of extra content, lots and lots of live shows and fun things planned for the year ahead, so do check that out. And you can also find a link down below to my online shop. Thank you so much for watching, keep smiling and stay positive.